Dr. Warren raised the gun and pulled the trigger. Not once, not twice, 5 times. 5 shots fired into the body of Teresa Reed, a nurse who had spent the last 12 hours saving lives inside his own hospital. The sound of those gunshots tore through the corridor like thunder, and when the echo died, all that remained was silence, and Teresa crumbling to the floor. This is not fiction. This is what happened at St. Alden Memorial, and what came next shocked everyone who witnessed it. If this is your first time on our channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The night shift at St. Alden Memorial Hospital had always been the quietest stretch of the day. After the chaos of afternoon rounds, after the emergency calls that flooded in between 3 and 6 in the evening, after the last visiting family member had been gently escorted out through the front lobby, the hospital settled into something close to stillness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The elevator doors opened and closed with a soft, mechanical breath. Somewhere down on the second floor, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm, and somewhere else, a tired orderly pushed a cart loaded with clean linens down a long, empty hallway. Teresa Reed moved through all of that stillness like she belonged to it. She had been on her feet for nearly 12 hours. The surgery she had assisted in that evening, a complicated abdominal procedure on a 58-year-old schoolteacher named Mr. Harold Finch, had taken longer than anyone anticipated. There had been complications. There had been a moment, around the 7th hour, where the lead surgeon, Dr. Malone, had looked up over his mask with eyes that said everything his mouth could not. Teresa had met that look without flinching. She had handed him the instrument he needed before he even asked for it. That was what she did. That was who she was. Now, at just past 9 o'clock in the evening, she peeled off her surgical gloves, dropped them into the waste bin, and rolled her shoulders back until she felt the tension crack loose. She was 31 years old, but tonight she felt older. Her feet ached inside her clogs. Her lower back had been sending quiet complaints since hour 4. But Mr. Finch was stable. He was breathing. His wife, who had sat in the family waiting area with a rosary wrapped around both hands, was going to get to hear good news tonight. That was enough. Teresa grabbed her bag from her locker, ran a hand through her dark hair, and started making her way toward the main corridor that led to the parking structure. She passed the nurse's station, nodded to Diane, the charge nurse on the evening shift, who was deep in paperwork and barely looked up. She passed the vending machine alcove where 2 young residents were arguing in hushed voices about something related to a patient chart. She passed the bulletin board covered in staff announcements and a printed photograph of last year's hospital fundraiser gala. She was almost to the elevator when she saw him. Dr. Elliot Warren stood at the far end of the corridor, near the administrative wing, in a dark suit that looked wrong for the hour. He was not moving. He was not looking at his phone or carrying anything in his hands. He was simply standing there. And the moment Teresa's eyes found him, something moved through her chest that she could not immediately name. It was not fear, not yet. It was closer to the feeling you get when you walk into a room and realize the temperature has dropped without explanation. Dr. Warren was 62 years old. He had been the CEO of St. Alden Memorial for 11 years. He was the kind of man who gave speeches at fundraisers and shook hands with city council members, and whose photograph hung in the lobby beside the hospital's founding mission statement. He wore cufflinks. He spoke in complete sentences. He had never, in all the time Teresa had worked at this hospital, shown anything other than polished, institutional composure. But the man at the end of that corridor looked like a stranger wearing Dr. Warren's face. His jaw was tight. His eyes, even from that distance, had a quality she had never seen in them before. Not anger exactly, something beyond anger, something that had already passed through anger and come out the other side into a place that had no name she was comfortable speaking out loud. Teresa kept walking. She told herself she was tired. She told herself she was reading into things. She had been on her feet for 12 hours. Her brain was playing tricks. "Dr. Warren," she said, because she was close enough now that not saying anything would have been stranger than speaking. "Long night for you too?" He turned his head toward her slowly, too slowly. "Ms. Reed," he said. Just that, her name. No greeting attached to it, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the hour or the shared exhaustion of the day. Just her name, spoken the way you might read a word off a page you did not care about. Teresa stopped walking. Not because she chose to, because her body made the decision before her mind caught up. "Everything okay?" she asked. Dr. Warren looked at her for a long moment. His hands, she noticed, were at his sides. His right hand was slightly behind his hip, slightly out of sight, slightly wrong. "Go home, Ms. Reed," he said. His voice was quiet, not gentle. Quiet the way a house is quiet when something inside it has already broken. Teresa opened her mouth to respond, and that was when she heard it, a sound, sharp, metallic, small in the way that terrible things are sometimes small before they become enormous. She looked down. She looked back up. The gun was already out. Later, when she tried to piece together the sequence of what happened next, she could not do it cleanly. Memory does not work cleanly when the body is in shock. What she remembered was not a series of events, but a series of sensations, each one arriving like a wall she ran into before she could see it coming. The first shot was the loudest thing she had ever heard in her life, not because of the sound itself, but because of what the sound meant. Her brain refused it for one full second, refused to process the data her ears were sending it, refused to accept that this was real, that this was happening, that the man standing 6 feet away from her in the corridor of the hospital where she worked had just pointed a gun at her and fired it. The second shot came before the first one had finished echoing. She felt the impact before she felt the pain. That is a thing people do not understand about being shot, a thing the movies get wrong. There is a moment between the bullet entering your body and the pain arriving that is almost peaceful, almost like being shoved hard from behind by someone very strong. The pain comes after. The pain is the second wave. The third shot sent her sideways into the wall. She grabbed at the wall with both hands, not thinking, only grabbing, the way you grab for something when you are falling. Any surface, any anchor, anything that tells your hands you are still here, still present, still alive. "Why?" she said, or tried to say. She did not know if the word came out. The fourth shot knocked the breath completely out of her. She slid down the wall. She was on her knees, and then she was not on her knees anymore. Her body had stopped following instructions. The floor was very cold against her cheek, and the fluorescent light above her was very bright, and in the distance she could hear voices, running feet, a door slamming, someone screaming a name she thought might be hers. The fifth shot. And then the corridor was full of sound again, full of running and shouting, and the kind of controlled panic that hospital staff are trained for, but never fully prepared for when it is one of their own on the floor. Teresa was aware of hands on her. She was aware of Diane's voice. Diane, who had barely looked up from her paperwork 10 minutes ago, now saying her name over and over in a voice stripped raw, saying, "Teresa, stay with me. Teresa, look at me. Look at me right here." She tried to look at Diane. She found Diane's face above her, and she thought, distantly, that Diane looked afraid in a way she had never seen before, and that the fear on Diane's face was somehow the most honest thing Teresa had seen all day. "I'm here," Teresa said, or she thought she said it. She could not be sure. The overhead PA system crackled to life. "Code red, corridor 7, code red, corridor 7. She heard Dr. Malone's voice somewhere nearby, the same voice that had been calm and precise over a body cavity 6 hours ago, now barring its edges, calling out instructions to the residents who had materialized from the alcove. 2 young doctors who had been arguing about a patient chart 60 seconds ago, and were now kneeling on the floor trying to keep a colleague alive. Dr. Warren was gone. That was a fact that would not settle in Teresa's mind for a long time. Not because she couldn't process it, but because it seemed impossible. A man had shot her 5 times and walked away. In a hospital, in a building full of witnesses. He had simply turned and walked and gone. Where do you go after something like that? Where does a man go? The answer, as it turned out, was his office, Suite 412, with the mahogany desk and the glass award cases, and the framed photograph of the governor's handshake, and the view of the city that he had told more than one journalist was his favorite thing about the building. He went there, and he closed the door, and he did not come out. But none of that was known yet. In those first minutes, in that corridor, the only reality was the floor, and the hands, and the sound of Teresa's own breathing, which had become the most important sound in the world. "Stay with me," Diane said again, and her voice cracked on the last word. And Teresa thought, through the fog and the cold and the way the light above her kept going in and out, that she had never heard Diane's voice crack before, not once in 4 years, and that there was something almost sacred about hearing it now. "I'm trying," Teresa said, and she meant it with everything she had left. The gurney came. The wheels, the straps, the ceiling moving above her as they rushed her down the corridor, the faces of her co-workers tilting past like photographs in an album being flipped too fast. She recognized people. She recognized James from the lab, standing in a doorway with his hand over his mouth. She recognized Priya, one of the night shift nurses who was supposed to come on at 10, already here, already in her scrubs, standing at the edge of the corridor with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. Teresa wanted to tell them she was going to be okay. She did not know if that was true. The truth was that 3 of the 5 bullets had done serious work. 1 had nicked a lung. 1 had torn through soft tissue near her left shoulder and exited cleanly, which was a mercy. 1 had done something to her abdomen that the surgical team would spend the next several hours trying to understand and address. The other 2 had grazed, 1 her left arm, 1 her right side, and in the context of everything else, those were almost afterthoughts. The surgical team that assembled around her was the same team she had worked beside for years. Dr. Malone was there. He had been called back before he even made it to his car. He came in through the staff entrance, still in his street clothes, under a hastily thrown surgical gown. And when he looked at her on the table, something passed across his face that he immediately and professionally locked away. "Teresa," he said, "I need you to breathe for me." "I know," she said. "I know how this works." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Then let's do this," he said. She was still conscious when they began the prep. She was still conscious long enough to hear the sound of the monitors, long enough to feel the cold of the iodine, long enough to look up at the surgical light above her. The same kind of light she had stood beside hundreds of times looking down. And think about the strangeness of that, being on this side of it, being the one on the table instead of the one holding the instrument. She thought about Mr. Finch, his wife with the rosary. She thought about Diane's voice cracking. She thought about Dr. Warren's face in the corridor, that expression she had never seen before, that thing beyond anger, and she thought, I need to understand that. I need to know what that was. And then the anesthesia reached her, and the light went soft, and the thinking stopped. Out in the hallway, the situation was spinning in several directions at once. The hospital administrator on duty, a meticulous woman named Gloria Suarez, had already called the police and was now managing a hospital floor that had, in less than 15 minutes, gone from ordinary late-evening quiet to something that looked and felt like a crime scene. Because it was a crime scene. That was the thing Gloria kept having to say to the staff members, who kept appearing at her elbow with looks of disbelief on their faces, as if waiting for her to tell them there had been a mistake, that there was a reasonable explanation, that the man who had run this hospital for 11 years had not just shot a nurse in a corridor and retreated to his office. There is no mistake, Gloria said each time. Do your job, Take care of your patients. Let me handle the rest. She said it calmly. She said it clearly. Inside, she was unraveling at a speed she was not going to examine until all of this was over. The police arrived 9 minutes after the first call. 2 patrol cars, then a third, then a detective in a gray sedan who moved through the lobby with the quiet authority of someone who had done this kind of thing many times and had learned to save his reactions for later. Detective Ray Okafor was 54 years old, heavy-set, with a deliberate quality to his movements that some people mistook for slowness. It was not slowness, it was precision. He listened to Gloria's summary of events with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes moving steadily around the lobby, cataloging, calculating. "The shooter is still in the building?" he said. "In his office," Gloria said. "Suite 412. He won't answer the phone. He won't respond to knocking, but his assistant confirmed he went in and has not come out." Detective Okafor nodded. "Is anyone with him?" "No, he's alone." "All right," Okafor said. "I need you to clear the administrative wing. Get everyone out quietly. Don't alarm the patients. Can you do that?" "I've already started," Gloria said. He looked at her for a moment with something that might have been respect. "Good," he said. The administrative wing on the 4th floor was, by the time Okafor and 2 officers arrived, nearly empty. The few late working staff members who remained had been escorted out by security in the preceding minutes. The hallway leading to Suite 412 was quiet in a way that felt pressurized, like the air before a storm. The office door was closed. A thin strip of light showed at the bottom. He was in there. Okafor stood in front of the door for a moment, not moving, just listening. He could hear nothing from inside. No movement, no voice, nothing. He knocked. "Dr. Warren," he said. "This is Detective Okafor with the city police. I need you to come to the door." Silence. "Dr. Warren, I know you're in there. I'm not asking you to do anything except open this door and talk to me." Silence. One of the officers behind Okafor shifted his weight. The sound of it, the small shift of leather and boot heel on linoleum, was very loud in that quiet hallway. And then, from inside the office, very quietly, Dr. Warren's voice. "She knew," he said. Okafor did not move. "What did she know, Dr. Warren?" Silence again. Longer this time. "She knew," Dr. Warren said again, and this time his voice had something in it that Okafor had heard before in the voices of men in exactly this kind of situation. Men who had passed through the point of no return and were standing now on the other side of it, in a territory where the normal rules no longer applied. And she was going to tell. Okafor kept his voice level. "Tell me about that," he said. "Tell me what she knew." But the strip of light under the door went dark, and Dr. Warren did not speak again that night. Down on the 2nd floor, behind the sealed doors of Operating Room 3, the surgical team was 40 minutes into a procedure that would last 4.5 more hours. Dr. Malone worked with the steady, focused precision that was his professional signature, speaking in low, even tones to the team around him, making decisions and adjusting them in real time with the calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic was not a tool. The night wore on. The monitors beeped. The hospital breathed around them, the way hospitals breathe, this constant cycling of crisis and recovery, of terrible things in small salvations. And Teresa Reed, shot 5 times in a hospital corridor by the man who ran the institution she had given her working life to, held on. She held on with a stubbornness that Dr. Malone would later describe in a conversation he had no intention of having in front of any camera or reporter, but had anyway, as nothing short of extraordinary. "She fought," he would say, "every single step of the way. I have been in that operating room for 20 years, and I have never seen anyone fight harder." But in that moment, in the operating room, all anyone knew was what the monitors told them. And what the monitors told them, through each difficult hour, was the same simple An astonishing thing. She was still here. Outside, the city moved through its night unaware. Traffic lights cycled on empty intersections. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The stars above St. Alden Memorial were invisible behind cloud cover, the way stars sometimes are on the nights when you most need them. Inside Suite 412, behind a locked door and a turned-off light, Dr. Elliot Warren sat in the chair behind his mahogany desk, in the dark, and waited for whatever was coming. He had known, for a long time, that something was coming. He had felt it building the way you feel pressure change in your ears before a descent. He had made calculations. He had taken steps. He had told himself that the steps were enough, that the calculations were sound, that the thing he was protecting was worth the cost of protecting it. He had been wrong about almost all of it, but sitting in the dark, in the silence of his locked office, he was not yet ready to admit the full shape of how wrong. That would come later. Everything, as it turned out, would come later. For now, there was only the dark and the silence, and somewhere below him, 5 floors down, a woman who should not still be alive, insisting on remaining so. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 53 minutes. Dr. Malone did not sit down once. He stood at that table the way soldiers stand at a post, not because it was comfortable, not because he was unaware of the burning in his own legs or the dryness at the back of his throat, but because standing was the only option available to a man who understood exactly what was at stake on that table in front of him. Every decision had weight. Every move carried consequence. And in the back of his mind, beneath all the clinical focus, beneath all the training and the experience and the professional armor he wore as naturally as his own skin, one thought kept surfacing like something refusing to sink. He had worked alongside Teresa Reed for 3 years. 3 years of morning briefings in difficult cases. And that particular kind of trust you only build with someone after you have both stood in the fire together and come out the other side. She had handed him instruments in the dark of countless surgeries. She had talked him through a staffing crisis on a Tuesday afternoon when he had been close to losing his temper with administration. She had once sat with a dying patient's daughter in a waiting room for 2 hours because the girl was 18 years old and alone, and Teresa Reed simply could not bring herself to leave. That was the woman on his table, and someone had shot her 5 times. "Pressure's dropping," the anesthesiologist said. "I see it," Malone said. "Give me more suction." The next 20 minutes were the worst. Malone did not say that out loud. He would never say it out loud in a room full of people he needed to keep focused. But later, in the honest accounting he conducted inside his own head, he would mark those 20 minutes as the passage where the outcome had been genuinely uncertain, where the margin between one world and another world had been so thin you could have threaded a needle through it. They brought Teresa back from that edge, together, as a team. And when the monitors steadied again and the numbers climbed back into the range that meant life was continuing rather than concluding, the collective exhale in that room was the most human sound Malone had heard in years. "Okay," he said, quietly, to no one in particular. "Okay, let's finish this." 9 minutes past 2 in the morning, Teresa Reed was moved to the intensive care unit. She was alive. She was not conscious. She was not out of danger, but she was alive. And in the economy of that night, alive was everything. While the surgical team was finishing their work on the 2nd floor, the 4th floor of St. Alden Memorial had become something else entirely. Detective Ray Okafor had been joined by his partner, Detective Sasha Lind, a compact woman in her early 40s with short-cropped hair and the kind of eyes that cataloged everything without appearing to try. They had set up a temporary command point in the conference room adjacent to the administrative suite, and the officers positioned in the hallway outside Suite 412 had been given clear instructions. Nobody enters. Nobody provokes. We wait. Okafor was good at waiting. Lind was better. "He hasn't moved," one of the officers reported. "No sounds. No response. Light's been off since 2200. Okafor checked his watch. 2:17. He's been sitting in the dark for 4 hours, Lynn said. She was leaning against the conference table with her arms crossed, not because she was relaxed, but because she had learned a long time ago that looking relaxed in tense situations was its own kind of leverage. "What does that tell you?" Okafor said. "Either he's thinking," Lynn said, "or he's done thinking." Neither of them said what that meant. They both knew what that meant. "Get the hospital administrator back in here," Okafor said. "I want to know everything about this man. Not the official biography, the real information, who he talked to, what he was worried about, whether anyone noticed anything off in the last few weeks." The officer nodded and left. Lynn looked at Okafor. "You believe the nurse knew something?" she said. Okafor thought about the strip of light under the door going dark. He thought about doctor, women's voice, the way it had sounded when it came through that door. Not panicked, not frantic, tired, profoundly, exhaustedly tired, like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally, terribly, set it down in the worst possible way. "I think she knew something," Okafor said. "And I think whatever it was, it's still in that building somewhere. Files, records, something." Lynn uncrossed her arms. "Then we need to find it before he destroys it." Gloria Suarez arrived at the conference room door 7 minutes later. She had not gone home. She had not slept. She was still in the same press blazer she had been wearing when the first patrol car arrived. And there was something in the set of her jaw that said she did not intend to leave until she understood the full shape of what had happened in her hospital tonight. Okafor gestured to a chair. She sat. "Tell me about Dr. Warren," he said. "Not the public version, the real version." Gloria was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not hesitation, but preparation. The gathering of words that are difficult to say because saying them means something cannot be unsaid. "3 months ago," she said slowly, "I noticed discrepancies in the billing reports." Okafor did not move. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Inflated procedure costs. Insurance claims for procedures that either never happened or were documented under patient names that didn't match our census records." She paused. "I brought it to Dr. Warren directly. And he told me it was a clerical error. He said he would look into it. He was very calm, very reassuring." Another pause. "The reports were corrected within 48 hours. I assumed it had been resolved." "But you didn't fully believe that," Lynn said. Gloria looked at her. "No," she said. "I didn't fully believe that." "Did you tell anyone else?" Okafor asked. "I started to. I mentioned it informally to our head of finance, Dr. Chen." She folded her hands on the table. Dr. Chen was let go 2 weeks later. Dr. Warren cited performance issues. The room was very quiet. "And Teresa Reed," Okafor said. "How does she connect to this?" Gloria's expression shifted in a way that was small but significant, the way the surface of water changes when something moves beneath it. "Teresa worked closely with several of the patients whose names appeared in the false billing records," she said. "She would have known those patients personally. She would have known their procedures. She would have known if something had been filed under their names that never actually happened." Lynn exhaled slowly through her nose. "She wasn't just a witness," she said. "She was a direct link." "Yes," Gloria said. And then because the implication of all of this was settling into the room like something cold and heavy, nobody said anything for a long moment. It was Okafor who broke the silence. "I need access to your financial records. Everything from the last 2 years. I need it now, tonight, before anything gets touched." Gloria was already standing. "I'll get you everything I have," she said. It was during that same window of time, while Okafor and Lynn were working through the administrative corridors of the hospital's financial history, that Diane Marsh was sitting in the family waiting area on the 3rd floor with a cup of cold coffee cradled in both hands, and was doing the thing she had been trained her entire career not to do. She was falling apart. not visibly. From the outside, Diane looked like what she was, a charge nurse of 17 years, a woman who had seen things in hospital corridors that most people could not imagine. A professional whose composure was a tool she used as automatically as a surgeon uses a scalpel. From the outside, she looked like someone sitting quietly and waiting for news. Inside, she was back in that corridor. She was back on her knees on the floor beside Teresa, and she was hearing the echo of those shots, which had not stopped echoing in her mind in the hours since. And she was looking at the blood on her own hands and the look on Teresa's face, which had been the most terrible thing. Not the pain, not the fear, but the confusion. Teresa had looked confused. Like her brain was still trying to process the data. Like some part of her was still standing there in the corridor thinking, this cannot possibly be what this is. Diane pressed the cup harder between her palms. A hand touched her shoulder and she looked up. It was James from the lab. He sat down beside her without asking, which was the right thing to do. He didn't say anything either, which was also the right thing. After a while, Diane said, "She told me something 2 weeks ago." James looked at her. "What?" Diane stared at the opposite wall. "She said she had found something in a patient record that didn't add up. She was going to check it against the actual procedure notes. She said she wasn't sure what it meant yet, but it felt wrong." Diane's jaw tightened. "I told her to be careful. I told her if it was something serious to go through proper channels." James was very still. "Did she?" he said. Diane's voice came out unsteady for the first time all night. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what she did. And I didn't ask her again. I let it go. I was busy and I let it go. And now she is in an operating room and I—" "Stop," James said, firmly but not unkindly. "Stop right there." Diane stopped. "This is not on you," he said. "Whatever Teresa found, whatever she did with it, that man with the gun is the only person responsible for what happened tonight. Do you understand me?" Diane looked at him. Her eyes were bright with something she was refusing to let fall. "I should have asked her again," she said. "Maybe," James said, "but you couldn't have known. Nobody could have known it would go this far." The waiting area was quiet around them. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. A phone rang twice and then stopped. And then Priya appeared in the doorway, one of the night shift nurses, still in her scrubs, and the look on her face made Diane stand up before the words even came. "She's out of surgery," Priya said. Diane exhaled so forcefully it sounded like a gasp. "She's in the ICU. Dr. Malone said she's stable." The word stable had never in Diane's life carried so much weight. "Can we see her?" Diane asked. "Not yet, not tonight." Priya looked at both of them. "But she made it. She's here." Diane sat back down. She pressed one hand over her mouth. James put his arm around her shoulders, and she let him. And the three of them sat in the waiting area in the middle of the night and breathed with the specific relief of people who had been braced for a catastrophe that had narrowly been redirected. But upstairs, the catastrophe was still very much unfolding. At 3:47 in the morning, something changed outside Suite 412. The light came back on. The officer in the hallway saw it first, the thin strip of yellow reappearing at the bottom of the door, and immediately radioed Okafor, who was in the middle of reviewing a stack of billing documents that Gloria had pulled from the financial server. "He's moving," Okafor said to Lind, already on his feet. They came down the hallway quickly, but without running. Running communicates panic, and panic is contagious. And the last thing Okafor needed right now was a panicked man on the other side of a locked door. He stopped in front of Suite 412. He knocked twice. "Dr. Warren, it's Detective Okafor. I need you to come to the door." A pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. Then the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing a carpeted office floor. Okafor glanced sideways at Lind. She had one hand resting near her holster, not drawing, not threatening, just ready. Her eyes were on the door. The handle turned. Dr. Warren looked nothing like the man in the lobby photograph. He looked nothing like the man who gave speeches at fundraisers and shook hands with city council members. He was still in his dark suit, but it was crumpled now, and his face had the sunken, used-up quality of someone who had spent hours doing something exhausting inside his own mind. He looked at Okafor. He looked at Lind. He looked at the two uniformed officers behind them. And then he looked down at his hands, which were empty. "The gun is on the desk," he said. "I'm not going to run." Okafor kept his voice entirely neutral. "Step out here, Dr. Warren, slowly." He did. The handcuffs went on without incident. Warren did not resist. He did not speak. He stood in the hallway of the institution he had run for 11 years, with his hands behind his back, and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance. And something about the stillness of him in that moment was more disturbing than if he had fought. Lind leaned close to Okafor. "The gun," she said quietly. Okafor nodded. Two officers went in to secure the weapon. Lind walked beside Warren as they moved him toward the elevator, not holding him, just present. "You said she knew something," Lind said. Conversational, easy, the tone of someone making small talk. Warren didn't answer immediately. "You said she was going to tell," Lind continued. "Tell who?" The elevator arrived. They stepped in. Warren stared straight ahead. "Everyone," he said finally. "She was going to tell everyone." What was she going to tell them? The elevator descended. "That I've been taking money," Warren said, in a voice so flat it was almost academic, as if he were discussing someone else's crime in a classroom. "Insurance fraud. For 6 years. Millions of dollars." Lynn kept her expression neutral. 6 years, she said. The hospital was losing money. The board was threatening restructuring. I made decisions I shouldn't have made. He looked at the elevator doors. And then I made more. And then I couldn't stop. And Teresa Reed found out. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. "She found a patient's name on a claim," Warren said as they walked him through the lobby, past the security desk, past the mission statement and the framed photograph of his own face. A patient she knew personally, a man named Harold Finch. She knew what procedures he'd had. She knew what was and wasn't real. He paused. "She came to me 2 days ago. She said she wanted to understand before she reported it. She gave me 2 days." Okafor, walking slightly behind, heard every word. 2 days. Teresa had given the man 2 days to explain himself, because that was who she was, because she was the kind of person who wanted to believe in explanations before she surrendered to conclusions. And he had used those 2 days not to explain, not to confess, not to step down or turn himself in, or do any of the things a person with a functioning conscience might do. He had used them to make a different decision. They walked Dr. Elliot Warren out through the front doors of St. Alden Memorial Hospital at 4:12 in the morning. A patrol car was waiting at the curb. 2 reporters who had picked up the scanner traffic were already there, cameras raised, voices calling out. Warren did not look at them. He looked straight ahead. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head for hours and had arrived at a place of terrible, empty calm. The patrol car door closed. The cameras kept clicking. Inside the hospital, on the 3rd floor, Diane Marsh was still awake, sitting in the same chair, holding the same cold coffee. She did not know yet about the confession. She did not know yet about the fraud, or the 6 years, or Harold Finch's name on a false insurance claim. She did not know the full shape of what Teresa had walked into 2 days ago, what Teresa had been carrying quietly around this building without telling anyone except, possibly, herself. What she knew was that Teresa was alive. That was the fact she was sitting with. That was the fact she was holding on to with both hands. In the ICU, 3 floors up, Teresa Reed breathed steadily in a room full of machines that were monitoring her body's decision to continue. She was deeply unconscious. She did not know that the man who had shot her had just been placed in a patrol car. She did not know that the records she had found were already in the hands of investigators. She did not know that the story of what had happened to her in that corridor was, at this very moment, beginning to spread. Through the staff, through the police department, through the scanner traffic that the reporters outside had picked up, and soon through everything else. She did not know any of it, but her heart beat steadily. Her lungs filled and emptied. Her blood pressure held at a number that meant the body was still choosing to fight. And somewhere in the building below her, Detective Ray Okafor sat down at the conference room table across from a stack of financial documents that represented 6 years of fraud, 6 years of patients' names attached to procedures that never happened, 6 years of a man in a dark suit and cufflinks deciding that the institution he was supposed to protect was instead something he could drain and drain and drain until someone noticed. Someone had noticed. She was upstairs unconscious, with tubes and monitors, and the careful attention of a night shift ICU team who would not leave her side. And the story of what she had found, what she had done with what she found, and what it had cost her, that story was just beginning to come apart at the seams, thread by thread, in the quiet hours before morning. Okafor opened the first file. He started reading. The night was not over. Okafor read through the night. By 5:30 in the morning, he had gone through 11 files, and the number that kept appearing in column after column, claim after claim, patient name after patient name, had stopped surprising him and started doing something worse. It had started making him angry in that deep, sustained way that does not burn hot and fast, but settles into the chest and stays there. The kind of anger that outlasts the night and is still present weeks later when you are sitting in a courtroom watching a man explain himself to a jury. 6 years, $2.4 million, 47 patients whose names had been attached to procedures they never received. Some of them were repeat patients, people who came to Alden Memorial regularly, people whose medical histories were familiar enough to the billing department that their names could be borrowed without raising flags. Harold Finch had appeared 3 times. A 72-year-old woman named Constance Bell had appeared 5. Lynn came in at 6 and set a cup of coffee on the table beside him without saying anything. She pulled up a chair, scanned the file he was currently reading, and made a sound in the back of her throat that was not quite a word, but communicated everything clearly. He wasn't just taking, she said after a moment. He was careful. Look at the spacing. The claims are distributed across 3 different insurance carriers. He staggered the amounts so none of them individually would trigger an audit threshold. Someone helped him, Okafor said. Lynn looked up. Billing department, Okafor said. He couldn't have done this alone. Someone inside the billing operation was processing these claims. Lynn was quiet for a moment. Dr. Chen, she said, the finance director Warren fired 2 weeks ago. Okafor leaned back. Either Chen was involved and Warren was cutting loose ends, he said, or Chen figured it out and Warren needed him gone before he talked. Which one? I don't know yet, Okafor said, but I will. He closed the file and picked up his phone. At 7:14 in the morning, the first news van arrived outside St. Alden Memorial. Then a second. By 7:40, there were 4 of them, parked along the curved driveway in front of the hospital's main entrance. Their satellite antennas extended, their reporters standing in carefully arranged positions with the hospital facade behind them, speaking in the measured, urgent tones that the medium requires. Inside, the staff arriving for the morning shift walked through a lobby that looked normal from the outside and felt, from the inside, like the aftermath of something. The security desk had 2 additional officers. The administrative wing was still cordoned off with police tape. There was a stillness to the building that had nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with a community of people processing a shared trauma in real time. Priya was still there, still in her scrubs from the night before, because she had been unable to make herself leave. She was sitting at the nurse's station when the morning charge nurse, a man named Carl, arrived and found her there and said, "You need to go home." "I know," Priya said. "Then go." "I will," she said. "I just want to see her first." Carl looked at her for a moment. He had read the overnight report. He knew what the night shift had been. He knew about Teresa, and the surgery, and the ICU, and the man in the patrol car. He had driven to work this morning past the news vans and thought, somewhere in the machinery of his practical, disciplined mind, that the story of what happened here was going to be very large and very loud and was going to change things. "ICU visiting is restricted," he said. "I know," Priya said again. Carl paused. Then he picked up the desk phone. "Let me make a call," he said. They let Priya stand in the doorway of Teresa's ICU room for 2 minutes. Not inside, just in the doorway. The ICU nurse on duty, a quiet, methodical man named Tom, stood slightly to her left and watched the monitors with the professional attention of someone who does not stop working just because there is an emotional moment happening nearby. Teresa was still unconscious. She was smaller than Priya remembered her looking, which was a strange thing to think about a person she saw every day. But that is what shock does. It makes familiar things suddenly unfamiliar, suddenly fragile in ways you were not previously prepared to see. Priya stood in the doorway for exactly 2 minutes. She did not cry. She had cried in the parking lot at 5 in the morning, alone in her car, for about 20 minutes, and had used up whatever was available at that time. Now she just looked. "She looks peaceful," Priya said quietly. Tom glanced at her. "She's fighting," he said, simply, as a correction. Priya looked at him. "She looks peaceful," he continued, "but the numbers tell a different story. Her body is working very hard right now. It just does it quietly." Priya nodded slowly. "That sounds exactly like her," she said. "She drove home at 8:15. She slept for 4 hours, woke up, and immediately turned on the news. By 9 in the morning, the story was everywhere. The initial reports were skeletal and slightly wrong in the way early reports always are. The number of shots was misreported as 3, then corrected to 5. Dr. Warren's title was given incorrectly in 2 separate broadcasts before being fixed. One outlet ran a headline calling the event a workplace dispute that generated immediate backlash to force a revision within the hour. But the core fact was out, and the core fact was devastating in the clean, simple way that certain truths are devastating when they are reduced to their most essential elements. The CEO of St. Alden Memorial Hospital had shot one of his nurses 5 times in a hospital corridor. That fact moved through the city like a current through water. By 10, the hospital's main phone line was receiving calls at a volume that overwhelmed the switchboard. Patients calling to ask about their safety, former patients calling to ask whether their medical records had been compromised, journalists calling for statements, advocacy organizations calling to express outrage. 3 city council members called within the same hour, each one of them needing, in different ways, to be seen responding publicly to something they had only just learned about. Gloria Suarez handled all of it with the same controlled steadiness she had maintained since 9 the previous evening. She issued a statement. She confirmed that the hospital was cooperating fully with investigators. She confirmed that the employee who had been injured was receiving the best possible care. She did not confirm the details of the fraud investigation because that was Okafor's domain, and she understood, with the institutional precision that had made her good at her job for 20 years, exactly where her lane was and how to stay in it. But in the moments between calls, in the seconds between one crisis and the next, she sat at her desk and thought about what Warren had said through that locked door. She knew, and she was going to tell. Gloria had given Warren the billing discrepancy information 3 months ago. She had sat in his office, in the chair across from his mahogany desk, and she had laid out what she found, and he had looked at her with exactly the composure he always wore and told her it was a clerical error. She had believed him. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to go back to her office and continue doing her job and tell herself that the matter was resolved. She had been an instrument, she realized now. Without knowing it, she had handed Warren the information he needed to understand exactly how close the exposure had come. She had given him the chance to trace it back to its source, to assess the threat, to begin making a different kind of calculation about what he needed to do to protect himself. 3 months ago. That was when the clock had started ticking for Teresa Reed, and neither of them had known it. Gloria sat with that knowledge in the quiet between phone calls, and it was one of the heavier things she had ever carried. At 11:47 in the morning, a man named Raymond Chen walked into the police precinct downtown and asked to speak to whoever was handling the street Alden Memorial case. He was 51 years old. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too large for him and carrying a manila folder held against his chest with both arms, the way a person carries something they are afraid of dropping. He had dark circles under his eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had made a decision after a long struggle and had arrived at a strange peace on the other side of it. The desk officer called Okafor, who had gone in to file preliminary paperwork and was on his third cup of coffee. He came out to the front, looked at Raymond Chen and said, "You're the finance director." "Former," Chen said. "He fired me 2 weeks ago." "I know," Okafor said. "Come with me." They sat in an interview room, and Raymond Chen opened his manila folder. And what he laid out on the table over the next 40 minutes was the most detailed, most damning, most carefully documented account of systematic fraud that Okafor had seen in a 22-year career. Chen had not been complicit. That was the first thing he said, and he said it looking directly at Okafor with the kind of eye contact that is not bravado, but desperation, the desperate need to be believed about one specific thing. "I found the discrepancies 8 weeks ago," Chen said. "I started documenting them quietly because I didn't know yet how far up it went. I didn't know if I could trust anyone inside the hospital. I was building a case." "And Warren found out you were building a case?" "He called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon, very calm. You know how he is, how he is. He sat across from me and told me that a performance review had identified concerns about my leadership of the finance department and that the board had agreed my contract would not be renewed." Chen's jaw tightened. He didn't threaten me. He didn't have to. The message was completely clear. I leave quietly or something worse happens. "So you left quietly?" Chen looked down at the folder. "I left with everything I had compiled," he said. "Every document, every cross-reference claim, every patient name." He paused. "I was going to take it to the State Insurance Fraud Division. I had a meeting scheduled for next week." Okafor studied him. "Did you tell anyone inside the hospital what you had found before you were let go?" Chen was quiet for a moment that stretched just slightly too long. "I spoke to one person," he said. "Who?" Another pause. "Teresa Reed," Chen said. "She came to me about a month ago. She had found a billing record attached to a patient she knew, a Mr. Finch. She wasn't sure what she was looking at. She asked me if I could explain it." He looked at Okafor. "I told her she was right to be concerned. I told her what I had found. I told her to be careful." The room was very still. "You told her," Okafor said. "I told her enough," Chen said. "I told her the scope of it. I told her it went all the way to Warren." He stopped. "She said she was going to speak to him directly, give him a chance to come forward on his own." His voice dropped. "I told her not to. I told her it was too dangerous to confront him directly. She said she wasn't going to let someone else take the fall for it. She said if there was a chance he would do the right thing, she owed him that chance." Okafor put his pen down on the table. Teresa Reed had known the full scope of the fraud. She had known it came from Warren. She had walked into that hospital knowing what she knew, had looked this man in the eye 2 days before he shot her, had given him the opportunity to be better than what he was, and had paid for that generosity in a hospital corridor with 5 bullets. The anger in Okafor's chest, the deep, sustained kind that had been building since 5 in the morning, tightened another degree. "She saved your life," Okafor said quietly. "When Warren fired you and you disappeared, he may have thought the threat had been neutralized. He may have calculated that if you were gone and your documents were gone, the exposure was contained. It was Teresa going to him directly that forced his hand." Chen looked like he had been thinking about nothing else for the past 12 hours. "I know," he said. "I know that." The words came out barely above a whisper, and in them was the full weight of a man understanding his own role in a catastrophe he had been trying to prevent. "Help me put him away," Okafor said. Chen slid the manila folder all the way across the table. "That's why I'm here," he said. The press conference happened at 2 in the afternoon, in the lobby of the police precinct, not the hospital. The police department's public information officer stood at a podium and read a prepared statement that confirmed the arrest of Dr. Elliot Warren on charges of attempted murder and aggravated assault, with additional charges related to insurance fraud pending further investigation. He confirmed that the victim remained in critical but stable condition. He confirmed that the investigation was ongoing and that additional arrests were possible. That last line, "additional arrests are possible," detonated across the news cycle like a second explosion. Within 20 minutes, St. Alden Memorial's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Within 40, 3 of the hospital's major insurance carrier partners had suspended their billing relationships pending audit. Within an hour, the state's Attorney General's office had issued its own statement confirming that a formal investigation into St. Alden Memorial's billing practices was being opened immediately. The institution that Warren had spent 11 years building into his private architecture of deception was, in the space of an afternoon, beginning to come apart at every seam simultaneously. Back at the hospital, in a break room on the 3rd floor, Diane sat across from a detective she had never met before, a young woman named Officer Reyes, who had been assigned to take supplementary witness statements. Diane told her everything. She told her about Teresa coming to her 2 weeks ago with a concern about the patient record. She told her about her own advice to go through proper channels. She told her about the moment in the waiting room when she had understood, fully and completely, that she should have followed up and hadn't. Reyes wrote it all down without judgment. When Diane was finished, Reyes looked up. "Is there anything else you can think of? Anything at all that seemed off in the days before the shooting?" Diane thought about it. She thought about the last week, running it back through her memory like footage she was reviewing for something she might have missed. Monday rounds. Tuesday, scheduling conflict. Wednesday, Teresa in the break room eating a sandwich and staring at nothing with a look on her face that Diane had noticed but had attributed to fatigue. "Wednesday," Diane said suddenly. Reyes looked up. "Teresa was in the break room on Wednesday. She was distracted. I asked her if she was okay and she said she was fine. But she had this look." Diane paused, working to describe it precisely. Like she was carrying something, like she had made a decision and was waiting to see if it was the right one. She had been. She had already spoken to Warren that day. She had already looked him in the eye and told him what she knew, and given him 2 days. She had been sitting in the break room on Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of the quiet of that hospital, carrying the knowledge that she had just set something in motion that she could not take back. And she had looked at Diane and said she was fine, because she did not want to pull anyone else into it until she knew which way it was going to go. That was Teresa Reed. That was exactly who she was. Diane pressed her hand flat against the table, steadying herself. "She was protecting us," Diane said, quietly, not to Reyes, to herself. She was carrying the whole thing by herself to protect the rest of us. Reyes didn't respond, but she wrote it down. At 4:50 in the afternoon, Dr. Malone came out of the ICU with an update. The shift had turned. The afternoon team was in. He had stayed far longer than he needed to stay, far longer than any clinical obligation required, because he was not able to bring himself to leave until the numbers told him something more definitive than they had the night before. Now they did. He found Diane at the nurse's station. "She's being moved out of critical status," he said. Diane looked at him. "She's not out of the woods," Malone continued. "She has a long recovery ahead. There's going to be additional surgery for the lung, but the immediate crisis is resolved. Her body has stabilized in a way that is—" He stopped. He chose his next word with the careful deliberateness of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean. "Remarkable," he said. Diane breathed. "Can I see her?" "Tomorrow," Malone said. "She's still sedated. Tomorrow." He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "Diane," he said. She looked at him. "She asked about Finch," he said, "before the anesthesia took her last night. She asked whether Finch had made it through his surgery okay." Malone paused. That was the last thing she said before she went under. She wanted to know that her patient was all right. Diane stood very still. "And is he?" she managed. "He's fine," Malone said. "He went home this afternoon. His wife brought him flowers." He walked away down the corridor, and Diane stood at the nurse's station for a long moment, thinking about a woman who had been shot 5 times, and whose last conscious thought before surgery was whether her patient was okay. And she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that the people who hold institutions together are almost never the ones with the offices on the 4th floor. They are the ones on their feet at midnight, handing instruments to surgeons, sitting with frightened families, noticing when something in a billing record doesn't add up, and carrying the weight of what they know quietly through the corridors of the places they have given their working lives to, because they believe, stubbornly and specifically, and sometimes at enormous personal cost, that it matters, that it all matters. Teresa Reed believed that. She was still believing it from the ICU on the 5th floor, breathing steadily, fighting quietly, the monitors recording every determined beat of a heart that had decided, in a hospital corridor at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, that it was not finished yet. The evening news ran her photograph at 6. The overnight shows ran it again at 11. By midnight, her name had been searched over 100,000 times. People were leaving flowers outside the hospital entrance. 3 nurses from other hospitals across the state had called to offer blood donations. A woman in her 70s named Dorothy, who had been a patient at St. Alden Memorial 4 years ago, and whom Teresa had sat with through a frightening diagnosis, drove 40 minutes to leave a handwritten card at the front desk. The card said simply, "She held my hand when I had no one. Someone needs to hold hers now." The front desk staff put it in a bag with the other cards and flowers and things people were leaving, and the bag sat at the foot of Teresa's ICU bed, waiting for her to wake up. And in a holding cell downtown, Dr. Elliot Warren sat in the specific silence of a man who has watched everything he built collapse in the span of 18 hours, and waited for a lawyer who was not coming until morning. Teresa Reed opened her eyes for the first time on a Saturday morning, 39 hours after surgery, in a room full of machines that had been speaking on her behalf while she was silent. The first thing she saw was the ceiling, white, flat, familiar in the way that hospital ceilings are familiar to people who have spent enough time in hospitals. Not comforting exactly, but known. The second thing she was aware of was pain, which arrived not all at once, but in stages, the way a tide comes in, starting at her left shoulder and then spreading outward in every direction until it had covered everything, and she understood, fully and without ambiguity, the complete inventory of what had been done to her body. The third thing she was aware of was Diane, sitting in the chair beside the bed, asleep, with her chin dropped to her chest and both hands loose in her lap. Teresa looked at Diane for a long moment. She looked at the lines on Diane's face, the exhaustion written into every angle of her posture, even in sleep, and she felt something move through her chest that was not pain. Something warmer than pain. Something that made the pain feel, briefly, like a smaller thing than it was. "Diane," she said. Her voice came out wrong, thin and broken, like a radio signal from far away. But it was enough. Diane's head came up, her eyes open, and in the half second before she was fully awake, before the professional composure had time to assemble itself back into place, Diane's face showed everything. The fear, the relief, the exhaustion, the 3 days of holding herself together by sheer will, all of it visible in that one unguarded moment. Then she was awake, fully, and she leaned forward and took Teresa's hand in both of hers. "Hey," Diane said. Her voice was wrecked. "Hey," Teresa said. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. Tom, the ICU nurse, appeared in the doorway within moments, drawn by the change in the monitors. He came in without making a production of it, checked the readings, asked Teresa a series of brief clinical questions that she answered slowly and correctly, and then said he was going to call Dr. Malone. He said it calmly, the way he did everything, but as he walked back to the door, Teresa noticed that he was moving slightly faster than his usual pace. "How long?" Teresa asked Diane. 39 hours, Diane said. Teresa processed that. "Malone did the surgery?" "He did." "Good," she said, and then after a pause, "Finch, Harold Finch, is he?" "He went home Friday afternoon," Diane said quickly. "He's fine. His wife brought him flowers." Teresa exhaled. Something in her face settled. "And Warren," she said. Not a question. Not quite. More like a word she was testing the weight of, checking whether she was ready for whatever came after it. Diane looked at her steadily. "He's in custody," she said. "He was arrested Thursday night. He confessed to the fraud." She paused. "They found Raymond Chen's documents. They have everything, Teresa. Everything." Teresa closed her eyes. She kept them closed for long enough that Diane almost said her name again. Then she opened them. "I gave him 2 days," she said, quietly. Not with bitterness, with something more complicated than bitterness. "I sat in his office, and I laid it all out, and I gave him 2 days to do the right thing. I thought—" She stopped. "You thought he would," Diane said. "I thought there was a chance," Teresa said. "I know that sounds naive. I know how it sounds. But I've worked in this building for 7 years, Diane. I've worked for this institution. I thought if I gave him the choice, if I made it real to him, if I looked him in the eye and made it real." "It doesn't sound naive," Diane said. Her voice was firm. "It sounds like you. It sounds exactly like you. And there is nothing wrong with who you are." Teresa looked at her. "He shot me 5 times. "Yes," Diane said. "He did. And he is going to spend the rest of his life answering for it." The door opened and Dr. Malone came in, slightly out of breath, still in his weekend clothes, a flannel shirt, no tie, which was how Teresa understood that Tom had called him at home. Malone looked at her with the particular expression of a surgeon whose patient has just done something he professionally expected, but personally never fully counted on until it happened. "You are extraordinarily difficult to kill," he said. Teresa almost smiled. Almost. The pull of it hurt. "I noticed," she said. "He ran through the clinical assessment quickly and efficiently. The lung repair had held. The abdominal work was clean. The additional surgery they discussed would be scheduled for the following week, once she had more strength." He used words like remarkable and aggressive recovery, and beneath the clinical language was something else, something personal and unguarded. The way Diane's face had been unguarded in that first moment of waking. The visible residue of a doctor who had spent 4 hours in an operating room with someone he knew and had felt, through every one of those hours, the specific weight of what losing her would have meant. When he was finished, he stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her directly. "Teresa," he said, "the investigators are going to want to talk to you. I've told them you need at least 48 more hours before any formal interviews. That is non-negotiable, and I will enforce it." He paused. "But when you're ready, what you know is going to matter. What you saw matters. What he said to you in that corridor matters." Teresa met his eyes. "I know," she said. "I'll be ready." What neither Malone nor Diane told her yet, what they had both silently agreed to withhold until she was stronger, was the full extent of what the investigation had uncovered in the 39 hours she had been unconscious. The scale of it, the depth of it, the parts that went beyond Warren himself and reached into corners of the institution that were still being mapped. That would come later. There was time. For now, the fact of her being awake, being present, being here, was more than enough. Outside the hospital, the city had not quieted. If anything, it had gotten louder. Detective Okafor spent Saturday morning in a conference room at the precinct with 3 investigators from the State Insurance Fraud Division, 2 attorneys from the district attorney's office, and Raymond Chen, who had slept 4 hours on a cot in a back office and returned to the table like a man who had nowhere else to be until this was finished. The manila folder had expanded into 4 expanding folders, and those 4 folders were expanding into a picture that was larger and more complex than Okafor had anticipated when he first opened the billing files at 5 in the morning 2 days ago. The fraud had 2 layers. The first layer was what they already knew. Warren, using patient names, filing false insurance claims, distributing them across multiple carriers to stay under audit thresholds. 6 years, $2.4 million. The second layer was what Chen had found in his final weeks and not yet fully shared with anyone. The piece he had been holding back until he could confirm it absolutely. The piece that had been sitting in the very back of his manila folder under a plain manila divider with nothing written on it. Chen slid it across the conference table at 10:17 in the morning. One of the DA's attorneys picked it up, read the first page, and went very still. Okafor looked across the table at Chen. "Tell me," he said. Chen folded his hands. "Warren wasn't working alone," he said. "Not just in terms of the billing department. There was a second set of accounts, not connected to the hospital billing system at all. A separate corporate entity he had set up 7 years ago. A consulting firm, on paper, that billed the hospital for services that were never rendered." Chen paused. The firm had 2 other signatories. The room was quiet. "Who?" Okafor said. "2 members of the hospital's board of directors," Chen said. "Richard Hale and Patricia Moss. They have been receiving payments from the consulting firm for 5 years. Quarterly deposits. Clean on the surface, because everything connected to a legitimate-looking corporate structure." He looked at Okafor. They knew. They may not have known the exact mechanism, but they knew the institution was being used. They had too much visibility into the financials not to have known. The attorney who had gone still set the page down carefully. "This changes the scope of the charges significantly," she said, "to no one in particular, to the room." "Yes," Chen said, "it does." Okafor looked at the document in front of him. He thought about Warren in that corridor, his voice through the locked door. She knew, and she was going to tell. He had understood it to mean Teresa knew about the fraud, and she had, but now the picture was sharper, more specific. Teresa had found Finch's name. She had gone to Chen. Chen had told her the scope included Warren directly. What Chen had not told her, because he was not certain yet, was that it reached beyond Warren to the board itself. Warren had not known exactly what Teresa knew. He had not known whether Chen had shared the board connection. He had calculated, in the terrified logic of a man watching his life collapse, that the risk was too great, the exposure too total, the possibility that she knew everything too dangerous to manage through any means other than silence. He had made a decision in 2 days, the same 2 days Teresa had given him to do the right thing. He had used them to reach a different conclusion entirely. Okafor picked up his phone. "Get me 2 more arrest warrants," he said. The warrants for Richard Hale and Patricia Moss were issued by early afternoon. Both were served within 3 hours. Hale, a 67-year-old retired investment banker who had sat on the St. Alden Memorial Board for 9 years, was found at his home, came to the door himself, and looked at the warrant in the officer's hand with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a knock that he convinced himself was never coming. Patricia Moss, 59, a healthcare attorney who had joined the board 4 years ago and who had built a public reputation on hospital governance and transparency, asked 3 times to speak to her lawyer before she said anything else, which was both her legal right and its own kind of answer. The news of the additional arrests broke at 4 in the afternoon, and if the original story had moved through the city like a current, this moved through it like a detonation, because this was no longer the story of one man's corruption. This was the story of a system, a board of directors that was supposed to provide oversight and accountability and had instead provided cover, an institution that had been hollowed from the inside by the very people entrusted with protecting it. And in the middle of all of it, a 31-year-old nurse who had noticed a name on a billing record that didn't match what she knew to be true, and had followed that thread with the quiet, stubborn persistence of someone who understood that doing nothing was also a choice. By 6 in the evening, the state health department had announced a comprehensive audit of St. Alden Memorial's billing practices going back 7 years. The hospital's board, now missing 2 members who were in custody, convened an emergency session with the remaining directors and voted unanimously to engage independent outside counsel to manage the institution through the investigation. Gloria Suarez, who had not slept more than 3 hours in 3 days, was asked to serve as interim administrator until a formal leadership structure could be established. She accepted. She accepted standing in her office with a phone in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other, and she said yes with the steady, deliberate voice of a woman who had spent 3 days watching an institution she loved be torn open, and who had decided that the only response available to someone in her position was to be exactly the thing the institution needed most right now, which was a person willing to stay. Teresa did not know about the board arrests yet. She did not know about Gloria's interim appointment. She had been awake for 8 hours, had slept again for 3, and was awake again now, in the quieter hours of the early evening, looking at the bag of cards and flowers that sat at the foot of her bed, which Tom had pointed out to her during his afternoon check. She had not opened any of it yet. She was not sure she was ready for the weight of that many people caring about her all at once. But she had asked for her phone. Diane had brought it, charged, that afternoon. Teresa had held it for a while without turning it on, knowing that turning it on would be the beginning of a different kind of conversation, the kind that would require her to perform okayness for people who needed to hear it. Her mother, her sister in Portland, her friends from nursing school who would have seen the news. She was not ready for that either. What she did instead, in the quiet of the evening, with the monitors steady and the pain manageable beneath the medication, was think. She thought about Warren's face in the corridor. She had been thinking about it on and off since she woke up, turning it over the way you turn over something that you need to understand before you can put it down. That expression she had never seen in him before, that thing beyond anger. She understood it now in a way she had not understood it in the moment. It had not been rage. It had been desperation wearing rage like a coat. The expression of a man who had made one catastrophic decision and then spent 6 years making increasingly catastrophic decisions to protect the first one, and who had finally arrived at a place where the only logic available to him was the logic of someone who has already lost everything and is trying to keep it from becoming official. She had given him 2 days because she had believed in the possibility of a different outcome. She had sat across from him and had seen, or thought she saw, something in him that was still reachable. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong in a way that had nearly killed her. And yet, she could not bring herself to regret the attempt. She lay in the hospital bed and examined that fact from every angle and could not find the regret in herself. She could find the consequences. She could feel the consequences in every movement, in every breath, in the specific geography of her damaged body. But the attempt itself, the act of looking at another human being and believing that they retain the capacity to choose differently, that she could not regret. That was not naivety. That was the thing she was made of. There was a knock at the door. She turned her head. Detective Okafor stood in the doorway. He was in plain clothes, no badge visible, and he was carrying nothing. He had clearly checked with the nursing staff before coming, because Tom was visible just behind him and gave Teresa a slight nod that meant this was cleared. "Ms. Reed," Okafor said, "I'm sorry to come this late. I wanted to wait until Dr. Malone gave clearance." "He said 48 hours, Teresa said. "It's been 41, Okafor said. "I know. I'm not here for a formal interview. He stopped. He seemed to recalibrate. "I wanted you to know where things stand." Teresa looked at him. He had the face of a man who had been awake for most of 3 days, carrying a weight that was at once professional and human, the weight of a case that had turned out to be much larger than its first appearance, and the weight of the person at the center of it, lying in a hospital bed, looking at him with clear, steady eyes. "Tell me," she said. He did. Not all of it, not in clinical detail, but the shape of it. Warren, Chen's documents, the board members, the warrants served that afternoon, the audit, Gloria's appointment. Teresa listened without interrupting. She listened with the specific, complete attention of someone who has earned the right to hear this and knows it. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Richard Hale," Teresa said. "He gave the keynote at the hospital's anniversary gala last year. I served on the decorating committee." She paused. "Patricia Moss came to the holiday party in December. She shook my hand." "I know," Okafor said. "They were there the whole time," Teresa said. "Yes." Another silence. "How did you find Chen?" she asked. "He found us," Okafor said. "He walked into the precinct Friday morning with a folder full of documents. He'd been building the case for 2 months before Warren fired him." He paused. "He told us you came to him first, that you were the one who started pulling the thread." Teresa looked at the bag of cards at the foot of her bed. "I found a name," she said. "That was all. I found a name that didn't match, and I couldn't let it go." "That's not a small thing," Okafor said. "It didn't feel like a large thing either," she said. "It felt like doing my job." He looked at her for a moment with that same quality of something personal beneath the professional surface. "When you're ready to give a formal statement," he said, "take all the time you need. But what you saw, what he said to you in that corridor, it matters to the case. Your testimony is going to matter." "I know," Teresa said. "I already told Dr. Malone I'd be ready." Okafor nodded. He started to leave, then paused with his hand on the doorframe, in exactly the same way Malone had paused 2 days ago, in the exact same spot. He turned back. "Ms. Reed," he said, "for what it's worth, the way you handled this, going to him first, giving him the chance to come forward." He seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "A lot of people would have just filed the report and let it move through the system. You tried to give him a way out. I don't know if that was the right tactical decision, and I don't think you need me to tell you what it cost." He paused. "But I understand why you did it, and I think it says something about who you are." Teresa looked at him steadily. "He didn't take the way out," she said. "No," Okafor said. "He didn't." "Then the only thing left," Teresa said, "is to make sure it counts for something." Okafor left. The corridor outside was quiet. Tom moved back to his station with the unhurried precision that was his signature. The monitors continued their steady conversation. Teresa lay in the dark for a while after that, not sleeping, not thinking in any organized way, just existing in the particular stillness that comes after a very long effort, when the body and mind have both agreed to a temporary truce. She could hear, distantly, the sounds of the hospital operating around her. Footsteps, a cart, the muffled two-note tone of the PA system. The ordinary sounds of an institution continuing to function. The patients being cared for. The night shift moving through its routines. The work going on. She had chosen this building. She had given it years of her life, her expertise, her attention, her care. She had believed in what it was supposed to be. What it was supposed to be had been betrayed by the people at the very top of it. $2.4 million and 6 years and 47 patients whose names had been borrowed without their knowledge to serve a scheme that had nothing to do with their healing and everything to do with one man's inability to stop once he had started. But the people on the floors, the ones with their hands in it, literally and figuratively, the ones managing the overnight monitors and the medication schedules and the difficult conversations with frightened families, they had not betrayed it. Diane had not betrayed it. Malone had not betrayed it. Tom, moving quietly through his shift right now, with the same level of attention he brought to every hour of every shift, had not betrayed it. The institution was not its corruption. The institution was also its people. And the people were still here. Teresa thought about that for a long time in the dark. At 11:40 at night, she reached out and picked up her phone. She turned it on. She waited while it loaded, watched the notifications arrive in a cascade that she was going to address slowly and carefully over the next several days. Then she opened it to a blank message and typed a single text to Diane. It said, "I want to come back." The reply came in under a minute. 3 words, all capital letters. "Very Diane. We know you do." Teresa set the phone back down. She looked at the ceiling, the same white ceiling, the same flat familiarity. She thought about what she was going to say in that courtroom. She thought about Warren's face. She thought about Harold Finch's wife with the rosary. She thought about Dorothy, whom she didn't know had left a card at the front desk, but whose name she would read in 3 days when she finally opened the bag and sat with all of it. She thought about the work that was still ahead, the surgery next week, the weeks after that, the months of recovery that would be slow and uneven, and sometimes painful in ways that had nothing to do with the physical. She thought about what she had told Okafor. The only thing left is to make sure it counts for something. And she made a decision, lying in that bed, in the quiet of the hospital she had given her working life to, with the monitors steady and the city moving through its night outside the window. A decision that was not dramatic and did not announce itself, but settled into her with the weight and the certainty of something true. She was not finished. She was nowhere near finished. The second surgery happened on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after the first. Dr. Malone had scheduled it carefully, waiting until Teresa's body had rebuilt enough strength to handle another round of anesthesia and repair work on the damaged lung tissue. He had explained the procedure to her the afternoon before. In the direct, unhurried way he explained everything. What he intended to do, what the risks were, what the expected recovery timeline looked like after. He did not soften the harder edges of it because he knew her well enough to know that softening things was not what she needed. She needed the truth, laid flat on the table, so she could pick it up and decide what to do with it. She listened to everything. She asked 2 precise, clinical questions that made Malone smile slightly in spite of himself. Then she said, "Okay, let's get it done." The surgery took 2 hours and 11 minutes. Malone came out of it looking tired, in the way that is separate from exhaustion. The specific tiredness of someone who has done a difficult thing well and needs a moment to let the difficulty subside before the satisfaction can come through clearly. He found Diane in the hallway. She had taken to appearing at the hospital during her off hours with a reliability that no one commented on, because everyone understood it perfectly. "Clean," he said. "Everything went clean." Diane pressed both hands flat against her thighs, a gesture that was the most visible version of relief she was going to allow herself in a hospital corridor. "When can she go home?" "Another week, if she keeps progressing the way she has been," Malone said. "Maybe 10 days. Diane nodded. "She's going to want to come back to work the minute she walks out of here," Diane said. "I know," Malone said. "You're going to have to tell her no." "I know that too," he said. "I'm prepared for the argument." Diane almost smiled. "You think you are," she said. Teresa woke from the second surgery with the same stubborn clarity she had woken from the first, as if her mind refused to let the anesthesia linger a moment longer than medically required. She was in pain, acutely and specifically, in a way that was different from the diffuse, overwhelming pain of the first recovery, more focused, more manageable, easier to locate and breathe around. She noted this the way she noted clinical things, with attention and without drama. What she noticed second was that there was someone in the room she had not expected. Harold Finch sat in the chair beside her bed. He was wearing street clothes, a cardigan and slacks, and he was holding his hat in both hands the way older men sometimes hold hats when they are somewhere they want to be respectful. He was 70 years old, and he looked it in the best possible way. The face of a man who had lived hard and well and was still here to show for it. He looked at her when she opened her eyes, and his expression did the thing that faces do when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and suddenly the person they needed to give it to has appeared. "Mr. Finch," Teresa said. Her voice was clearer this time than it had been after the first surgery, stronger. "I told them I'd only stay 5 minutes," he said immediately. "I told the nurse, 5 minutes, that's all I need." "You can have more than 5 minutes," Teresa said. "No," he said firmly. 5 minutes is what I said, and 5 minutes is what I'm taking." He paused, looked down at the hat in his hands, looked back up. "I saw the news. My wife saw it first. She came into the kitchen and she couldn't even talk. She just showed me the phone." He stopped, cleared his throat. "They used my name. My name was on one of those false claims. You found it because of me." "I found it because it was wrong," Teresa said. "It would have been wrong with any name." "But it was my name," Finch said. "And you—" He stopped again. He was working hard to say this correctly, to say it the way it deserved to be said, and the effort of it was visible in every line of his face. "You could have filed a report and let it move through the system. You could have let the administrators handle it. You didn't have to carry it yourself. You didn't have to go to him directly." "I thought I could reach him," Teresa said quietly. "I know," Finch said. "That's what my wife said when I told her. She said that's exactly the kind of person she is. She reaches for people." He looked at Teresa steadily. "She's not wrong very often." Teresa held his gaze. She could feel the emotion in the room pressing in at the edges, the weight of this man's gratitude and his guilt, the complicated human mix of being grateful that something was exposed and knowing what the exposure had cost. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "After your surgery?" Finch blinked at her. "You're asking me how I'm feeling," he said. "You had major abdominal surgery 8 days ago," she said. "How are you feeling?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Better than you," he said. "That's not the bar I'm setting," she said. He did laugh then, quietly, and it changed everything in the room in the way that genuine laughter does, loosening whatever had been too tight, letting the air back in. "I'm good," he said. "My wife is making me eat soup even though I told her I want a real meal." He paused. "She's right, of course. I just can't let her know that." "Tell her I said she's right," Teresa said. "She'll like that," he said. He stood up, put his hat back on, adjusted it twice. He looked at her one more time with those eyes that had lived a long time and seen a great deal, and were currently doing the specific work of a person trying to hold in something they could not fully say out loud. "You're going to be okay," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Teresa said. "I am." He nodded. He left, and Teresa stared at the ceiling for a long time after the door closed, thinking about what it meant to matter to people, and how that meaning sometimes arrives at the most inconvenient moments possible, and how it arrives anyway. The trial of Elliot Warren began 11 weeks after the shooting. It was a significant event in the city, covered heavily in local and national news, drawing the kind of sustained public attention that cases involving institutional betrayal tend to generate. Not the flash and fade of a single shocking story, but the slower, more disturbing burn of a revelation that keeps unfolding. Richard Hale and Patricia Moss had both entered plea agreements with the district attorney's office 6 weeks earlier. Their agreements included full cooperation with the prosecution of Warren, detailed financial disclosures, and sentences that, while lenient compared to what full trial convictions might have carried, included permanent bars from serving on any healthcare board in the state. Moss had wept at her sentencing. Hale had not. He had stood with his hands folded in front of him and received the judgment with the same practiced composure he had used throughout his professional life. And it had struck more than one observer in the courtroom that the composure itself was the most damning thing about him. The evidence of a man who had learned to wear a face that was entirely disconnected from his actions. Warren had not taken a plea. His attorney had negotiated, and the DA's office had offered terms, and the terms had been reasonable by almost any calculation. And Warren had looked at his lawyer across a table in a county jail conference room and said no. His lawyer had leaned forward. "Elliot," he said, "going to trial with this evidence is not a strategy. It's a statement." "Then I'm making a statement," Warren said. "The nurse is going to testify," his lawyer said. "She's going to sit in that box and describe what happened in that corridor. And the jury is going to look at her and look at you. And there is no version of that scenario where you benefit from it going forward." Warren had looked at his hands, the same hands that had held a gun in a hospital corridor 3 months ago, the same hands that had signed fraudulent insurance claims for 6 years, the same hands that had shaken the governor's hand in a framed photograph that had been removed from the hospital lobby 8 days after his arrest. "I know," he said. "Then why?" his lawyer said. Warren was quiet for a long moment. "Because she deserves to say it in a room where it's official," he said finally. "Because if she went through all of that, the least I can do is stand there and let it be official." His lawyer stared at him. It was the most human thing Warren had said in 3 months. It was also very possibly the most human thing he had done in 6 years. And it had arrived approximately 10 seconds too late to matter in the way it might once have mattered, if it had arrived before a gun came out in a corridor. Teresa testified on the 3rd day of trial. She walked into the courtroom on her own. She had been offered assistance and had declined it, not as a performance of strength, but because she had spent 11 weeks working toward the specific physical independence of being able to cross a room on her own terms. And she intended to arrive at this moment the way she had arrived at every difficult moment in her working life, which was to say, under her own power. She was still recovering. Anyone who looked at her could see that. The slight caution in her movement, the way she managed her breathing during the walk to the stand, the careful way she settled into the chair. But her back was straight. Her hands, when she placed them on the rail in front of her, were steady. She told the story from the beginning. Not just the corridor, the billing record, Harold Finch's name, Raymond Chen, the conversation with Warren in his office when she laid it out and gave him 2 days. Every detail delivered with the clinical precision of a woman who had been trained to observe and remember and recount, and with something beneath the precision that the jury could not look away from. The straightforward, unchoreographed quality of a person telling the truth. The courtroom was so quiet during her testimony that the sound of the court reporter's keys was clearly audible. The prosecutor asked her to describe what happened in the corridor. She described it. She described the sound, the impact, the floor, Diane's voice. She described Warren's face. When she finished, the prosecutor thanked her and sat down. Defense counsel stood. He was a careful man who had spent his career learning to dismantle narratives in courtrooms, and he approached Teresa Reed with the specific caution of a person who understands that they are in the presence of something that is very difficult to attack without looking like exactly what you are doing. He asked her whether she had considered going to law enforcement instead of confronting Warren directly. "Yes," she said, "but you chose not to." "I chose to give him the chance to do the right thing himself first," she said. "I believed he might take it." "And when he didn't?" "When he didn't," Teresa said, "I was going to report it the following morning. I had the documentation. I had Raymond Chen's contact information. I had a plan, but he shot you before you could execute that plan." "Yes," she said. He shot me 5 times in a hospital corridor. She said it simply, not for effect, because it was the fact, stated plainly, and plain facts have a particular power in rooms where people are trying to determine what is real. Defense counsel sat down. When Teresa stepped down from the stand and walked back through the courtroom, she did not look at Warren. She had decided that beforehand, had decided it in the quiet of her apartment the evening before. She had been discharged from the hospital 3 weeks earlier and was living at home, doing outpatient physical therapy 3 times a week, rebuilding her lung capacity with the same steady persistence she brought to everything. She had decided she did not need to look at him. She had already looked at him in a corridor when it mattered. She did not need to look at him now. But as she reached the aisle and turned, she heard his voice. "Ms. Reed." It came from the defense table. Quiet, not loud enough to be a disruption, barely loud enough to reach her. His lawyer put a hand on his arm immediately, but Warren was already looking at her, and for 1 second they looked at each other across the length of that courtroom. His face, now, was not what she had seen in the corridor. It was not the thing beyond anger, the desperation wearing rage as a coat. It was something else, something hollowed, something that might have been, in another life, in a man who had made different choices 10 years ago, or 6 years ago, or even 2 days ago, the beginning of remorse. She did not stop walking. She did not acknowledge him beyond that single second of eye contact. She walked out of the courtroom and into the corridor beyond it, and sat down on a bench against the wall, and took a slow, careful breath, and let it out again. Diane appeared from the public gallery doorway 30 seconds later and sat beside her without a word. After a moment, Teresa said, "He said my name." "I heard," Diane said. "I don't know what he wanted." "I don't think he knows either," Diane said. They sat together on the bench in the courthouse corridor, and Teresa took another slow breath, the kind that was still slightly more work than it used to be, the lung still knitting itself back together in the way that healing happens. Not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small recoveries, one breath after another, adding up to something whole. The jury returned its verdict on a Friday afternoon. 11 counts, guilty on all of them. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, 6 counts of insurance fraud. Additional charges related to the corporate consulting scheme. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 11 times the word traveled to the courtroom and registered differently on every face that heard it. The relief, the satisfaction, the grief that justice always carries, because justice means something terrible had to happen first in order to require it. Warren received 22 years. His attorney had been right that going to trial without a plea had not been a strategy. The sentence reflected that. When the number was read, Teresa, sitting in the gallery with Diane on one side, and James on the other, and Priya in the row behind her, did not react visibly. She had spent months preparing herself not to need a dramatic moment from this proceeding, not to need a reaction that matched the size of what had been done to her. She had decided that the proceeding itself was the moment, the official, documented, permanent recording of what was real, and that was enough. That had always been what she was after. Sufficient, she thought. This is sufficient. The aftermath moved quickly in the way that aftermaths do when they have been building towards something for a long time and are finally ready to arrive. The state insurance fraud investigation resulted in recovery orders against Warren's personal assets and the corporate consulting entity. 47 patients were formally notified that their names had been used, without their knowledge, in fraudulent claims. A settlement fund was established. Harold Finch received a letter that his wife read to him at the kitchen table, and when she finished reading it, they sat together in the particular quiet of people who have received something they are not sure they know what to do with. And she held his hand, and they didn't talk about it for a while. Raymond Chen testified at 2 separate hearings, for the criminal trial and for the state regulatory proceeding, and was not charged with any wrongdoing. He returned to healthcare finance with a different organization 6 months later. On his first day at the new job, He sent Teresa a text message that said simply, "Because of what you started, thank you." She saved the message. She did not reply immediately because she was in the middle of a shift and she was busy, which was exactly as it should be. Gloria Suarez was confirmed as permanent CEO of St. Alden Memorial 4 months after the trial. The board had been restructured entirely. New members with full disclosure requirements, independent oversight, a formal ethics committee that had not previously existed. Gloria had pushed for all of it, had pushed with the precise, relentless efficiency of a woman who had watched an institution she believed in be gutted from the inside, and had decided that the only acceptable response was to rebuild it so thoroughly that what had happened could not happen again. She called Teresa into her office 3 weeks before the official confirmation. Teresa sat across from the desk, a different desk, Gloria's desk, clean lines and no cufflinks anywhere in sight, and waited. "I want to offer you a role," Gloria said. "Formal title, compensation, a seat at the table where decisions get made." She paused. "Director of Patient Care Standards. It's a new position. It didn't exist before because it should have existed before and didn't, and I want to correct that." Teresa looked at her. "You want me in administration," she said. "I want you in the building," Gloria said, "in whatever capacity keeps you here. But yes, the role is administrative. It involves oversight of care protocols, patient advocacy, a direct line to my office on any concern that comes from the nursing staff or the floor teams." She folded her hands. "It involves making sure that what happened, the conditions that allowed what happened, cannot quietly rebuild themselves while we're all looking somewhere else." Teresa was quiet for a moment. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Yes," Gloria said, "that's why I'm asking you." Teresa thought about the billing record, the name that didn't match, the thread she had pulled. She thought about what Chen had told her, the full scope of it, and how she had gone to Warren's office and sat across from him and said, "I found something that isn't right, and I need you to explain it or correct it, because this institution is supposed to be better than this." She thought about what it had cost her to say that. She thought about the 53 other nurses in this building who went home every day and came back the next morning and did their jobs with the specific dedication of people who believed that the institution around them was something worth believing in, and who deserved to have someone in a room with a seat at the table making the case for that belief. "I want to keep my clinical hours," Teresa said. "Part of the week I'm on the floor, non-negotiable." Gloria did not hesitate. "Done," she said. "And the position has real authority," Teresa said. "Not advisory, not consultative. Real decision-making authority over patient care standards." "That is exactly what I am offering," Gloria said. Teresa looked at her for one more moment, the look of a woman doing a final accounting of everything she knew about this building, this institution, the people in it, the work ahead, the cost already paid. "Then yes," she said. She started the role on a Monday morning in early spring. She walked into the building through the front entrance, past the lobby desk where 2 security officers nodded at her, past the wall where a new institutional mission statement had been mounted 3 weeks earlier, the old one having been quietly taken down during the period of investigation, the new one written by a committee that Gloria had assembled and that had included, at Gloria's specific insistence, 3 members of the nursing staff. Teresa had been on that committee. She had written 2 of the sentences herself. She walked past the elevator, changed her mind, and took the stairs instead, because her lung was strong enough now for stairs, and she intended to use every bit of strength she had built back. She stopped at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor. Diane was there, mid-report, clipboard in hand, reading off night shift updates to the morning team with the brisk efficiency that was Diane's natural frequency. She glanced up when Teresa appeared. Their eyes met for 1 second. Diane gave her a single nod, small, precise, the nod of a woman who does not make large gestures because she has never needed to. Teresa nodded back and continued down the corridor. She had a 9 o'clock meeting with the heads of 3 departments about a new patient complaint protocol she was implementing. She had a stack of care standard documents to review before noon. She had a follow-up call with the state health department in the afternoon about the audit's final findings. She had a full day, a full, specific, consequential day in a building she had given her working life to and had almost lost her life inside of. A building she had chosen to return to, not because she had no other options, but because she understood, with the clarity that only comes from surviving something enormous, exactly what it meant to stay. She had found a name on a billing record that didn't match, and she had followed it to the end, and the end had nearly killed her. And she had survived the end and stood up from it and walked back in through the front door of the same building. And she was going to spend every day, for as long as she was able, making sure that the institution around her was worth the cost of what it took to protect it. That was not a small thing. That was not a modest thing. That was the whole thing. Teresa Reed sat down at her new desk in her new office on the 4th floor of St. Alden Memorial, 1 floor below the suite where a man had once sat in the dark and made the worst decision of his life. And she opened the first file, and she began.